Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, SIF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my producer and co-host, Aaron Spears. How's it going, Aaron?
Pretty good, Dee. How you doing?
I am good, thanks. We're going to talk about a film today on this episode that tackles a political and social movement that has surprisingly deep roots in the U.S.
Indeed, it does, Dee. I think the audience is going to find many things about the big, scary S word to be pretty eye-opening.
Mm-hmm. And joining us now to talk about those things are the film's director, Yael Bridge, and one of the participants in the film, DeCarlo Johnson, who was a worker owner with Evergreen Cooperatives. Yael and DeCarlo, welcome to SIF Speaks.
Thank you for having us.
So, Yael, what got you interested in exploring the subject of socialism in a film?
Yeah, great question. I was just really intrigued, I think as many people were, by the success of Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary, and just saw him come out of nowhere, really do phenomenally well, and not run away from the term socialism at all, but rather embrace it. And that did not seem to deter people who would I thought would have been struck by that. And I was working on a previous film called Saving Capitalism with Robert Reich. And through that film, I was traveling all around the country during the primary season and met a lot of people who were torn between Bernie or Trump. And they were, just middle America, not this coastal elite, whatever, this idea that I had of socialism and what socialists look like at all, and said, oh my goodness, there's really something happening. And so I just wanted to see what it was. And that was how the film went.
And scary is in the title. So why did some folks that you observed find the idea of socialism scary?
Probably because we have to talk about the success of the Cold War and anti-socialist propaganda, which I think the film dips into. And it's a charged word, very much so. I think it's pretty generational, was my experience on the film and talking to people. But really, if you're roughly between the ages of like 35 and 80, that's there's a really strong negative connotation. And there's a lot of people that fall into that category.
There's also, we're at the Cleveland International Film Festival recording on our end in Cleveland. So we got to ask you about the interesting Cleveland connection that you've got on screen in this film. At what point did you find out about the Evergreen Cooperatives, and what was the decision process to include that in the film?
Yeah, the film ended up being more historical than I had ever anticipated. Just that was really interesting to me, and novel. Wasn't anything that I'd known before. So we knew we were going to have that, but we also wanted to find what are contemporary examples of socialism. We knew that we wanted the film to really be based in America. That was very important to me, for it to be a strictly United States story. There are lots of other films and articles, whatever, talking about Scandinavian different examples of what socialism looks like elsewhere. And I felt really strongly that we didn't have to look elsewhere. We could look here in the United States. And what would those examples be? And worker-owned co-ops was a really strong example. Also a little controversial. Some socialists, wouldn't call worker-owned co-op socialism technically. And I didn't want to get stuck in those definitions. But trying to find examples. And within that, there's a whole range of worker-owned co-ops. I live in Oakland, and right down the street is a bakery that I go to all the time that is a worker-owned co-op. And I never thought twice about it. Didn't realize how special they were. And then when I began to do research to try and find what would be a good one, really trying to find an example of one that's successful and that scale that's quite large. The one that I have near me has, I think they said like maybe 50 or 60 employees, which is still quite large, but not, Evergreen is just really big, and was also an area of the country that I was eager to explore. Wasn't part of the film. The film really wanted to visit a bunch of different locations. And so we were really fortunate to stumble upon Evergreen, which really is a leader in the field, and that they were game and eager for us to come. And I got to meet DeCarlo and hang out. And it was pretty great.
Excellent. And DeCarlo, at the time of the filming, you were a worker owner at Evergreen. So what did that mean? How did being part of Evergreen compare to work experiences you had before?
Yeah, so my prior work experience, I explained this in the film. I'm not sure if it was featured in there. I can't remember, but it's just when you work for a co-op, it's not only like family oriented. So, you know, most jobs you don't really feel like you're a part of the production, top of the line revenue. You just almost like a number, just an employee. So working for a co-op, I can say that you are involved in more ways than one as far as affecting the revenue. They involve you in like the budgeting. So you know, you kind of like a bookkeeper, a worker owner. So you can kind of pretty much gauge yourself on how much money you can make and what can go into your retirement account and of that nature. So it was just the involvement that's, you know, was a big difference for me past job.
And I was curious too about the work culture. I mean, I think of a job as there's a boss here who tells you what to do and you do it. What was the structure like in terms of people who were doing the job? Were you encouraging each other because then everybody makes more, or?
But it's still a similar structure to that of a, you know, a typical 9 to 5, if I'm gonna say. It's just it's voter based. So it's pretty much everybody come together as a collective.
So you said
You vote.
voter based? Okay.
Yeah, it's voter based. So being in the co-op, each person buys and owns a share into the company. Basically, for lack of better words, just like grants you leverage. So you have a vote, you have a voice, and you can pretty much determine the culture, determine the outcome. And everybody is pretty much, you know, they tighten it because, you know, everybody's feelings, emotions, views is all put out on the table. And then, you know, we collectively come up with a compromise. So it shouldn't be too bad.
Yael, you've already kind of mentioned in answering the previous question how the model of evergreen cooperatives fit into the film's narrative. So I wanted to kind of ask you about the other side of that. My partner's a high school teacher, so she was very excited when that part of the film came up. So we've got the Evergreen Cooperatives model. What made you decide to focus in on teachers as well as part of the narrative?
I knew that labor was an important component of the film. You know, I know that people talk about how to have systemic change, and people talk legislatively, and they also talk organizing and organizing workers. And so those were two things that I knew from the beginning were going to be really important character pieces. What I didn't know was just really lucky, as I think we all are really lucky, that was a really strong year for teacher strikes. And that was just, I wasn't sure if it was going to be teachers or nurses, looking at, who are sort of leading in organizing around strong labor unions. And then the teachers just went off that year. And Oklahoma was the second of that strike wave that year, of the Red State Revolt, I think is what they call it. All the Republican states where all the teachers had enough.
That was just good timing. It was like you're already filming and then that kicks off. So let's head to Oklahoma.
I was incredibly lucky. I mean, I had missed West Virginia, and like just by like a day. Like I had my ticket to go down to West Virginia, and then they settled, and like the day before I was going to get there. And so I was already plugged in with, the people, the labor organizers around the country who were involved nationally on where the teachers were going, and there were rumors of who was going to go off next. And then as soon as we heard Oklahoma, I was just on the phone on social media. I'd never been to Oklahoma. I didn't know anyone in Oklahoma. So there was some kind of casting. Angst is too strong, but it was a little bit harder than other places to find someone. I mean, it took like a few days. And then I was just very fortunate to find Stephanie. We talked on the phone. I really liked her. I got a good vibe. I hadn't met her. I didn't even know what she looked like. I was just like, oh, you seem awesome. I really like you. And then she just was, I don't know, I fell in love with her. I think you can see in the film. And now we're very close friends just by virtue of going. I just went to Oklahoma, hung out for 2 weeks. She ended up coming out to Oakland for the Oakland teacher strike, which we weren't able to tie into the film, though we did film it, that she just got radicalized as happens, as I had read about in books, and then got to fortunately witness myself what a strike can do for someone's politics.
DeCarlo, I was curious if you had any ideas or opinions about socialism in general before the film.
No, before the film, I had, I just knew the little bit about socialism because, by being involved in the co-op.
Hmm.
So
And so that's what I wondered. Did they talk about the culture at Evergreen as having a socialist kind of idea?
well, no, they never really mentioned it like that
Mhm.
word specifically. I guess in a roundabout way, in like the mission statement and just what they was trying to build. Yeah, but like as far as specifically saying, yeah, this is a socialist company and we're going with a socialist model. No.
So you had a chance to see the finished film?
Yes,
And so having done that, then has that changed your thinking or added to your knowledge of what the movement is?
tremendously. I didn't realize personally how involved in socialism, like a socialist economy, that I was really until being featured in the film and seeing the finished product. So it kind of forced me to research it a little bit more. So I didn't realize, that was kind of the avenue I was traveling, like subconsciously.
And is it something that you're still seeking again?
Yes, I mean, even in my today's work, it's still kind of the same thing. I like the idea, actually. I like the idea of, community-based organization, helping each one teach one.
You gathered a number of, I guess you call them like the person on the street interviews that are sprinkled in throughout this, which I thought was kind of interesting contrast as you're kind of revisiting the American narrative to kind of highlight the socialism threads throughout. But then the interviews were an interesting contrast to that because I'm guessing it's one of those things where you filmed a lot and then you picked certain ones to put into the film. Were those almost put in the film as like, here are the questions I'm going to answer? Like as, do they kind of represent maybe your target audience for the film?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had more. We did a lot of them, and frankly, like people just sort of gave the same answers. It wasn't as diverse as you might have imagined. And yeah, thinking about what are the questions, what are the biases people are going to come into this film with, and how can we address that and make that the starting point where we're all coming from, so it can feel a little bit more inclusive. I mean, I certainly was not calling myself a socialist at all when I started out to make this film. It wasn't like I had a specific agenda. It really was just a curiosity of like like where did this movement come from? How come so many people are now attracted to this word? Is this word even important? Like, does it have to be called socialism? And like DeCarlo, I think, pointed out really well, it wasn't anything that he was even thinking about. Certainly the people in North Dakota are deeply conservative. They love their bank and they do not want to talk about how it is socialist. That is, far from it. And so that, I think, was the thing that was really intriguing to me as I was doing my research for the project, was just discovering these are just practical solutions, and when you
Right.
when you paint such a broad brush and say, oh, all of these ideas are all horrible, but the ideas are actually quite popular. And I think as we can see, our country is actually quite, it's far more progressive than our policies might suggest. So there's a disconnect somewhere, but these are popular policies, and they're incredibly effective. Like, imagine if we had like a national bank instead. Like, only North Dakota has a state bank, but I was just talking with a friend who filed for unemployment, and the way they get their unemployment checks is a debit card through Bank of America. And I was just thinking, man, well, what if Bank of America wasn't a for-profit bank, but was just
Right.
actually the Bank of America? That would be so cool. And how much money would the country then save that doesn't have to make Bank of America rich, because they're just making so much money off of everyone collecting
Yeah.
unemployment right now. So just some common sense thinking was really what I was most struck by.
And one of the things I like about the film is that it showed me what a deep history socialism has in the country that I would guess most of the country doesn't know at this point. So the film is good for that historical background, but it's also a really lively sort of travelogue around the country. And I want to talk about the man who's often your guide, John Nichols. He's the author of the book, The S Word. I was curious how involved he was in the production of the film.
He was just an inspiration. I mean, he wasn't creatively involved at all. I read, when I started this, I had like a very massive stack of books of just, okay, where do I start? And I definitely started, I think his book, The S Word, was the first or second book that I read. So I'm sure that shaped my thinking tremendously. It's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough. It's very readable. It's not difficult at all. And so And I had a long conversation with him, and he was just very generous with his time. So we knew we wanted to go to Wisconsin because the idea that there was a city that had a string of socialist mayors for decades was just, I didn't know any of that. And then we got out there, and he's like, "Oh, you have to come to Ripon. I'll get in the, like, we'll go tomorrow." Ripon is not close to Milwaukee. I mean, it's like, it's several hours away. And he was just very generous. Sure, no, we'll go tomorrow. He just gave us a lot of time, which was really great. But frankly, I mean, I don't know if I was surprised, but everyone that we spoke to was incredibly generous with their time. All of the subjects, DiCarlo for sure, who's also, still game to just come and talk and hang out. But a lot of the academics who are really very accomplished. And I think, if I just had to guess, I don't think, they're getting a lot of interviews about socialism. A lot of the people that we spoke to, this was the first time they'd been in a documentary. It's not so frequent. People are trying to talk about Reconstruction, and its connection to contemporary politics. I mean, we should be. It's really important. It wasn't, much that I knew about, so it was exciting. But yeah, people were just really very generous.
I was asking myself, DiCarlo, about one of the missions that I saw for Evergreen early on was generating more economic growth for the greater University Circle neighborhood. Did you see a result of that from the work that was done by the company, or no?
Yes, that was their whole mission statement. So when I first started with Evergreen, it's a cooperative. So I started with a different company under the cooperative before I went to the laundry. And the company that I used to work for did LED retrofits, major hospitals, university, the Cleveland Hearing and Speech Building. They put a $5,000 solar array on Euclid and Lakeside, or Euclid and Lakeview, right across the street from the cemetery, if you're familiar with that area.
Yeah, I saw it all the time, and I wondered where that came from.
Yeah, so that's a part of the University Circle Power Reserve. So, and they also employed many people from the University Circle area, some people from school, they just had an impact in many different ways.
So the title of the film being The Big Scary S Word, I think it was, like you said earlier, that's a really good way to kind of provide it as like an introduction to the idea, because you're putting it right up front. Oh, it's that big scary S word everybody's worried about. And then it was actually spoken by Lee Carter in the film, who was the first person to win the seat in the Virginia House of Delegates as a socialist, or running a socialist platform. Was that where you got the title for the film, or were you working with something else in mind? Or when he said it, you're like, oh my God, that is the title? Or I was just curious how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there are things I'm good at and there are things I'm bad at, and naming things is definitely something I'm terrible at. I just had a daughter, and it was very hard. Coming up with that name was not
the ultimate naming challenge.
Oh my God, it was really terrible. I think I like her name, but I mean, it wasn't. But it wasn't easy. Anyway, for this film, certainly we had, I don't know, 100 names. We had a lot of names. It was really not easy for me or anyone on the team. We bounced around a lot. For a while, we were called Socialism, an American Story, and that felt like a little too Ken Burnsy.
Oh yeah.
We wanted something that was a little more clickbaity, but yeah, it was really hard to find. I guess the answer is no. Like, I was happy when we heard that line, but it wasn't like, oh, we heard that line and then oh yeah, that's right. Like, I combed through that transcript. Like, where is the line? And we were nervous also because, like you had asked, it's, John Nichols has a book, The S Word, right. And there was another documentary that was based off of his book that didn't get completed, but was in production around the same time, that was going to be called The S Word. So we knew, right away that wasn't a title that we could use. It's also the name of a documentary that came out, I think, a few years ago about suicide. And so, for tons of reasons, that was not going to be our title. And so we were conflicted, is even calling it The Big Scary S Word, too much, or should it be, anyway, no, the name is hard. Naming's hard. I could go on forever about how hard it is for me.
I'm a little curious about your daughter's name at this point, but I'll leave it out. I was really struck by the graphic elements of the film, the animation, and especially in a section that explains how socialism and capitalism functioned in ancient societies. How did that piece come together?
That's Vivek Chipper. He's a professor at NYU, and he was very helpful in the film, like John Nichols. Like I would talk to him a lot. He gave me a lot in the beginning of reading, and whenever I had a question, I don't understand this concept, I'd give him a call. And I think that was the thing that most struck me when I started learning about socialism, was I had assumed that capitalism was the same thing as markets. And so, oh, capitalism, we've had this system forever. This is really old. And one of the first things that I learned that he explained to me was, oh no, that's not the case. Actually, capitalism is very recent. It's only been a few hundred years. And we've had all these other systems. And my mind just like sort of exploded. That was really transformative for me. And then I just had in my head this image of a timeline where you would just line up all the different, I mean, obviously these categories are quite fluid. They don't just happen overnight. Like now we're in this era, now we're in that. But if you could sort of come to best you can, like map what it would look like, and you could see, oh, there's just capitalism, is this very, very sliver on the end. And you see, 90% of the screen or more is other something else. What does that do for you when you think about the rules of our society right now, right? You realize how current they are, how much they change, how this is not natural. This is not like, oh, this is the way it's always been. This is very recent. And that idea I find incredibly empowering. When we look at other changes, we can see how much progress has happened in gay and in queer rights in the last few, how quickly that happened. You go, oh my, these changes can really happen very fast. So I knew we wanted to get that in the film, and it's a hard idea. It's very dense. And so wanted to get some snappy animation that would help make these ideas a little more easy to understand.
A lot of film footage where you go back that far in human history.
No, no, not a lot of archival for that.
Right. The music, in addition to the animation, adds a lot of atmosphere, and I'm always fascinated with music and documentaries as well, because you're trying to evoke kind of different emotions than you do with fiction work. So I was curious what your selection process was, specifically for using Get Happy to open the whole film with, but then also how you went about scoring it in general too.
Yeah, we worked with a composer named Osei Essed, and he is fantastic and had done a lot of really strong films. And when we were looking for a composer, he happened to be the producer's cousin, I think, through marriage. And he just said, oh, my cousin does composing. Okay, whatever, I don't, what. And then he finally got me to listen to it. I was like, oh, wait, I've seen many of his films, and he's fantastic. And he really, he resonated with the topic really strongly. And so I think that was really helpful. In trying to have the score not just be, a generic documentary score, background music, but can have like a little, I don't think it's very strong, but it can have like a little bit more of an element, more of a characteristic. And then the opening song, it was hard to pick. We played that beginning with a lot of different songs. I'd be happy to send you some of the other ones, just because it was pretty fun. A lot of songs could slot in there, and this one felt, how to be ironic, how to be playful, and really juxtapose, like, oh, here's this idea of what, we have this American dream, and oh, we should just, everyone, like, we're gonna move, and actually it's just it's not so easy to just get happy.
DeCarlo, I'm wondering if, besides the part that you're in, there are parts of the film that really stuck with you.
Yes. What was a couple? I liked the politician. I think that's who she described earlier. That was in
Virginia.
Yeah, just because of how young he was, for one, and just the type of impact he was trying to provide to his community. Teacher, her story. I kind of, grasped onto pretty much everybody in the film.
Yeah. That's what I
Great
liked
answer.
about it. Yeah, it was for a subject as politically charged as it is these days, and really for the past 50 years, I suppose. It was really an engaging, accessible film. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. It was very hard. That it was a balance. So it really means a lot when I hear from people that say that,
it is.
that it worked.
And even you were talking about the academics who were excited about just talking about the idea of socialism. That excitement came through because there are some big weighty names in there like Cornel West, Eric Foner, but in general, overall, you found people who were really excited and engaged about the topic. Was there any casting, a screening process for that, for the people who were, no, just anybody who said yes?
Yeah, I mean, the casting was just people that that I came across in my research, that I read and that I thought were interesting and compelling, and certainly also trying to who's the leading expert on this topic, who's the leading expert on that topic, and also who's gonna do a good job, who's gonna come in, and I was really lucky.
There's also that worry sometimes. You can get an academic and read a book and like, this is really good, and then I'll go to like C-SPAN Book TV to see an interview and be like, I'm falling asleep, man. You gotta present this material a little snappier. So it was really great. Like, everybody that seemed very engaged and very excited to be communicating with you and be part of the project and communicate their ideas as well.
Yeah, well, I think everyone was really enthusiastic and engaged, and I also think that we had a very talented editor named Christy Herring, who is just a genius with interviews, was just able to find the right bites and to make everyone sound as smart and eloquent as they are, without all of the ums and pauses, and yeah.
Erin's good at that too.
Yeah, it's really important.
Obviously, not knowing your production schedule for this, how did the appearance of COVID-19, did it affect the production of the film at all?
Yeah, we were done basically, and then we were going to premiere at Hot Docs last year.
Oh, yeah.
And then Hot Docs canceled, which of course, and so we put in a few more months into the edit, actually, I think maybe 2 or 3, to really polish up and get it in shape, and then and to include COVID, which felt, it's always hard when you're done of a film to open up, and so Hot Docs canceling was actually a mixed blessing, because it felt like, okay, great, we can include this. I'm sure there's a whole film that you could make just on the ways that COVID has shown in our country the shortcomings of our capitalist system. So we just were able to include just a snippet, which also was great, because we hadn't included anything about Medicare for all, and that had felt like I had at some point I had thought it would have connected, and sort of none of the storylines we were following, it didn't land. So I was happy that we were able to find a place to include that information.
And DiCarlo, same idea. How did the pandemic affect how work got done for the Evergreen Cooperatives?
You know what? I really cannot elaborate on that, because I had moved on to a different job opportunity by the time COVID hit. So
in the setting that you're in now, is it a factor?
initially, yes. I mean, since then, it's been a year and some change. So since then, it's kind of leveled out, kind of getting back to the regular schedule program. But initially, it was all kind of a halt. The hours were reduced. So.
And you're doing okay now?
Oh yeah, everything is back, ramped up, back to being busy, back to making some money.
That's a good thing. Yeah. Why do you think it's important to share this film at this time in history?
Oof. Yeah, I think that we are really at a crossroads, and I think we have been for a few years, and it just feels like I keep saying, like, oh, things are getting really bad. Like, we got to figure this out. And this pandemic, like all other things, doesn't hit people equally, and people who have more are making like astronomical amounts of money, and people who have less are just struggling more and more. And I don't think that's a society that most people want to live in. It's not very sustainable, as we talk about in the climate change section at the end. This just is actually not going to work, even if it was something you were, ethically comfortable living with, that kind of inequality. It's just not efficient. And as the co-op shows, there's a much more efficient way to get things done. So my hope is that now people, are more open to these ideas, which they are more and more. I think it's under 35, they prefer socialism to capitalism, and that age keeps growing. And these ideas are more and more popular. And we can see sort of, even though Bernie Sanders didn't win the presidential primary, Biden is doing some quite progressive things that, no one thought, it's hard to remember, but Obama was more progressive than Biden, and Biden was brought onto the ticket to try and help people not be so scared by how progressive Obama was. That's not what history is going to show at all. Biden's going to end up looking far more progressive than Obama was. And that is just by virtue of all the work that the activists and organizers are doing, and the material conditions that people are living in, where this is actually not, people are back up against the wall saying, we're going to have to do something. This is not sustainable. So my hope is more people can see, not just, oh, come see my film, but be open to more different ideas, more different solutions, because I don't think anyone's going to like the alternatives. Even, rich people need to be afraid of those pitchforks. It's not just the people on the bottom that need to be working this out.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the ideas and the film with us. It's really good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you, DiCarlo, also for being part of the conversation and sharing those ideas as well.
Thank you for having me.
We've been chatting with Yael Bridge, the director of the documentary, The Big Scary S Word, and with DiCarlo Johnson, a former owner-worker with Evergreen Cooperatives, which is featured in the film. You can get details about The Big Scary S Word when you log on to the SIF website, clevelandfilm.org. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
We want to say thanks to our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. We also invite you to support your local film festival. Please consider a donation to the SIF Challenge Match presented by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Our goal is to reach $145,000 this year to support the future of our festival, and we're so grateful for any amount you're able to contribute. To donate, please visit clevelandfilm.org, and thank you for listening to SIF Speaks.